Hey everyone, and welcome to today's devotional. We're going to go over the word mercy today. Now, I know that Josh just went over the word grace just the other day, and I know that sometimes these words seem interchangeable, but they're actually a little different. And I wanted to kind of discuss that as we begin today. I've always heard, and you've probably heard this way of doing it, grace is getting what you don't deserve, and mercy is not getting what you do deserve. Now, I wouldn't be merciful if you deserve a piece of cake to not get that piece of cake. That's not mercy unless that piece of cake would perhaps hurt you, and hopefully it wouldn't. But mercy comes when you're deserving of something negative, when you're deserving of something terrible, a punishment perhaps, and you don't get that punishment. That is mercy. One of the best ways I think that we see grace, for example, illustrated in the scriptures is the prodigal son, aside from the cross, obviously, but the prodigal son. It is a story of great grace where God accepts this son back, and not only does he accept him back, but he puts a robe on him and a ring on him and throws a feast for the son. That is wonderful grace. Mercy, on the other hand, is not getting what you do deserve. Let me tell you a little story to kind of help illustrate this a little bit better. There was a young man who had been arrested back in the 1800s, the early 1800s, and he was sentenced to hang because he had stolen. The boy's mother sought mercy on his behalf from actually Napoleon I, the one that you're familiar with. Napoleon answered the mother's plea, who begged for her son's life. "This boy has stolen from my palace twice now. He deserves justice, and that justice is death." And the mother replied, "But I do not ask for justice, your highness. I seek mercy." "He does not deserve mercy," Napoleon replied. And the mother passionately begged, "It would not be mercy if he deserved it." What truth is spoken there? Touched by that, the mother's grief and passion as well, Napoleon consented and released the boy. You see, mercy is that. It is undeserved. It is nothing that we deserve. It's nothing that we can receive on our own merit. And it's something that Christians everywhere have experienced at the hand of God, something that Christ made possible for us. And in order to understand, I think, how great that gift is, because it might seem mundane to the normal person, I think we have to come to terms with something a little bit more harsh: the justice of God. You see, as Napoleon demanded justice, so God demands justice. Justice demands retribution for what has been done, or in our case, payment for the debt of sin. We cannot steal it, per se, but it is a debt that we owe, a debt that we cannot pay except with our lives. Death is the price, but to pay that price means the end. Just as for Adam and Eve from the very beginning, who heeded the deceitful words of the serpent, they found out that the cost is too great. And death comes for us all physically because of that, but the second death, that's the one we really want to look out for. That's the dangerous one. That's the one that we really ought to fear. When we understand the gravity of the situation, then only can we truly understand the payment that was made on our behalf and the mercy that is received instead. What we deserve was death, eternal punishment. James says in chapter 1 and verse 14 and 15, "But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed. Then when desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when full grown, brings forth death." What a dangerous truth that is. It talks about the process in which we get wrapped up in this. And each one is guilty, as we know from Paul, who says there is none righteous, no, not one. All sin and fall short of the glory of God. We know that. But when we see this, we see it starts with our desires. Just like with that apple, or not an apple, but the fruit in the garden. We don't know what fruit it was. So it's always portrayed as an apple in the children's things, but some think it was a pear. Some have said a passion fruit. I've heard all sorts of things. We don't know what it was. But it was the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, and they were not supposed to eat of that. So when they transgressed God's command, they sinned. But they were desired. They saw it. It was enticing. They wanted to eat it, and they were told that it was good, and so they just got it in their mind. And desire became full grown. It gave birth to their sin. They eventually took of it and ate. As they did, then they crossed that line. They sinned, they transgressed. And when that was full grown, just in that very instant, it brought forth death, just as God warned them it would. He warned them. He gave them that command. He told them what would happen. It brought forth death. Death is that separation, that relational separation between them and God, the relation that is the lifeline for their spirituality, but also their physicalness, because of it, they were kicked out of the garden. It did not directly kill them, but they were kicked out of the garden and they lost access to the tree of life. And because of that, they were not having access to that anymore. They would die eventually physically as well. So physical death takes place, but the spiritual death is the real one that we want to worry about. So we used to play a game when I was a kid, and we called it Mercy. Maybe you played it, might have called Uncle or whatever, all sorts of different games like that. But the way that we played it specifically was you were supposed to put your hands up like this, and then you'd lock knuckles with them. And after that, you would try to bend and pull and twist and bend as much as you could, trying to cause pain to the other person. And the person who cried for mercy first, yelling out mercy, they were essentially submitting and saying, I submit to you, you win. And that person would be the victor who did not cry it. And the person admitted defeat. It's to stop the pain, a release. And really, it's a silly game. And I know that you don't really deserve this type of pain in the same way we think about others. But mercy comes only, as well as in this game, if we submit to God. Otherwise, you're still wrestling, and you're going to lose when it comes to wrestling with God. That's the thing. It's not going to end well, and God has given us that warning. But one of the greatest missed lessons I think that Christians do not usually learn is that after God has given mercy, what should you do with it now? What should you do with your new lease on life? I think one of the lessons that a lot of the Pharisees, for example, didn't learn was actually given by the prophet Hosea in chapter 6 and verse 6, in which he declared that God said, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Now, on at least two different occasions in the book of Matthew, in chapter 9 and in chapter 12, Jesus refers specifically to what God says in Hosea 6:6. One of them, it's kind of like a homework assignment. He tells the Pharisees, after he has a difficult time with them, that they are to go and learn what this means. He says, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Go and learn what this means. Just a few chapters later, in chapter 12, the second time, it's almost like he's chastising them for not having learnt their lesson, saying, if you had known what these words mean, they wouldn't have had this issue with Jesus. In both ways, he's dealing with the problem of their understanding and how they dealt with people and how Christ dealt with people and why that comes into conflict with one another. That's because Christ is merciful. It didn't mean he let people walk all over them. It didn't mean he had no, qualifications or things that they had to do in order to, receive, the love from him. They had to do lots of different things, follow him. They had to do as he commanded. If he told them to do something and they did it, we often hear of those healings that took place. And he hung out with people who were sinners, but he did not participate in their sinful activity. But he did show them mercy that the rest of the world at the time might not have. Now, as Christians, what will we do with these words? What will we do with these words? Go and learn what this means. If you had known what these words mean, what will you do with those phrases particularly that Jesus says? I hope that we would learn that we need to be merciful, that we would heed the call of God in Hosea. I desire mercy. God wants us to be merciful because he has shown us mercy. I think this is beautifully shown by Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 18. And I'd like to repeat, to take the time to go over this parable very briefly. It's during a time when Jesus is talking about how we deal with sinning brothers, for examples. Peter comes to him in verse 21 and said, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times? Verse 22, Jesus said to him, I do not say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay, his master commanded that he be sold with his wife and children and all that he had, and that payment be made. The servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Then the master of the servant was moved with compassion, released him, saying, released him and forgave him the debt. Verse 28. But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii, and laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, "Pay me what you owe." So this fellow servant fell down at his feet and begged him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you all." And he would not, but he went and threw him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what had been done, they were very grieved, and came and told their master all that had been done. Then his master, after he had called him, said to him, "You wicked servant, I forgave you all the debt because you begged me. So you should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you?" And his master was angry and delivered him to the tortures until he should pay all that was due to him. So my heavenly Father will also do to you if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. In other words, when we think about this story, we should learn to be merciful because God has been merciful to us. Because we have received such great and wonderful mercy, we should do that. So do you want to be like God? Do you want to be like Jesus and show mercy? Show mercy because God expects us to. He's called for it. He desires it. Show mercy because you love Christ and what he's done for you. Show mercy because you want mercy as well. Show mercy because you have been given mercy. There's wonderful lessons to be learned on mercy here within the scriptures that are simple and easy for us to put into our lives. And think about how much more people will understand the grace and mercy of God if we are also gracious and we are also merciful. Thank you so much, and I hope God blesses you in these studies.